Hi guys. After months of interpretation, analysis, subjective views, um, looking into the possibility of submarine attacks and how they might occur, we now have the mainstream media picking up on these kind of reports, and they're doing it just before the end of the year. Coincidence? I don't know, but it's interesting that North Korea's development of an operational ballistic missile submarine would pose additional challenges for the US as it works to defend itself and its allies from the rogue nation's burgeoning missile program. As war on the Korean Peninsula becomes increasingly possible, the US and its allies are working to prepare themselves in case North Korea launches a ballistic missile at them. That often means preparing for intercontinental ballistic missiles to be launched through the air into space and eventually to re-enter the atmosphere and hurtle toward the target. Throughout 2017, North Korea continued to test missiles that experts believe are capable of reaching major cities in the US like New York and Washington, D.C. But now, some North Korea analysts say the threat could come from underwater. Surveillance photos recently showed that North Korean workers are quickly assembling what is thought to be the country's first operational ballistic missile submarine. North Korea already has one experimental submarine that could potentially launch ballistic missiles, but there is very little information available about the ship. If North Korea were to obtain a submarine capable of launching a ballistic missile, they would make missile defense even more challenging for the US. That's partly because it would give missile detection systems an additional threat to track. Tests have demonstrated that US missile defense systems, which have been likened to hitting a bullet with a bullet, are not capable of deterring every single missile. But submarine missile launches also are considered among the most deadly and difficult to counteract of all weapons, and the submarine-launched ballistic missile Pyongyang has been developing over the past year is suspected to be longer and more powerful than previous missiles, according to US and South Korean intelligence. The longer size of the missile would mean it could carry more fuel, and that would make it harder to detect because it would need fewer support vehicles for refueling. Just days after the footage was published by 38North, a website run by US Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, the US, Japan, and South Korea launched military drills to practice ways of tracking these hard-to-detect missiles. Destroyers from all three countries did computer-simulated training on how to track submarine missile launches. Some analysts argued the submarine would be too noisy to leave North Korea undetected, a fact that would provide the US and its allies with the chance to prevent an attack. But a submarine also might have the flexibility to get around the anti-missile systems used by countries such as South Korea. Just in relation to that, in relation to it being too noisy to leave North Korea, there was a report a while ago where the South Korean military lost track of 70 of North Korea's submarines. So what they're saying here, I would not agree at all. Japan recently announced that it will purchase 2 additional missile defense systems from the United States, meant to protect the country from North Korean aggression. North Korea will likely continue to develop its submarine-launched ballistic missile program into 2018. If submarines are armed, it's likely they won't move too far from the Korean coast, but they would still complicate regional warfare substantially. So there we have the very scenario we're talking about: submarines coming out of the ocean, submarine ballistic launched missiles, attacking the East Coast and possibly the West Coast as well. And this is all just coming out 3 days before the end of the year. And, I'm starting to feel like this is real. This is an event that has been planned. Whether it will take place at the end of the year is anyone's guess. But considering everything else that's going on and has been going on, it seems like they're ramping up to this. Last day of the year, New Year begins. We've got the lotus flower or lily flower in the iPad Goat video, symbolizing rebirth, regeneration. The New Year is often seen as that, a new year, new start, rebirth, all that kind of business. So what is the next step is always the question. North Korea, as we've said, appear to be preparing another missile launch, putting it under the guise of a satellite launch. and just going to play this video.
Are very preliminary signs. Multiple officials tell us that North Korea is moving equipment around. They're not able to tell us exactly what kind of equipment, but it's the kind of thing that is making them watch for the possibility in the coming days or weeks of another missile launch or even a satellite launch. It's simply too soon to say what exactly the North Koreans may be up to. All of this comes at a very sensitive time because the Pentagon also is going to tone it down, we are told, about U.S. military exercises in the region. Very sensitive right now because the Olympics are coming up, because there is a full-out effort to engage in diplomacy in the region. The Chinese, the North Koreans, very sensitive about U.S. military exercises. So look for less talk about all of that, more discreet, not talking about what these exercises, when exactly they're going to happen and what they're going to involve. But that may be risky military strategy in itself, because traditionally the U.S. military very much wants to talk about its exercises. It wants to put everybody on notice that when it is doing these exercises, especially near North Korea, it is simply for training, that there are no military operations in the works. And of course, the big unknown, this may be the new strategy, the new policy right now, but will President Trump adopt it, or will he engage in his own rhetoric about North Korea, perhaps on Twitter?
So that's the report there.
Now back to the scene.
It's just, it's odd in particular because obviously we're reaching the end of the year where we're looking at a potential second 9/11 event style event happening on the United States mainland, and you know, reports now coming out about possible submarines, which we've been talking about for months, and now the U.S. military is planning to quiet itself, become more discreet, not release, you know, information pertaining to any military drills or practices, tests that they may be conducting, which, as you heard the lady say there, is usually a way for the United States to convey the message that this isn't a military strike. They're not planning to, you know, attack or invade. It's just a test. And all these countries often, you know, warn each other that there's going to be some sort of drill or test taking place, so as not to spark any sort of, you know, provocation or retaliation in terms of that taking place. And obviously now they're not going to be doing that anymore. So what that says to me is that they are planning to do something, but they're not going to release any information about whether it's a test or not, because more than likely it won't be a test and it will be, you know, the real event. So I just wanted to kind of point that out and let you guys know that even more so things are stepping up again, stepping up to another level where essentially you go radio silent before, you know, launching a surprise attack. Now this new report has a North Korean soldier has had anthrax antibodies detected in his system. Anthrax is a naturally occurring pathogen. It's found in soil, but it's also manufactured. The only way for anybody to have anthrax antibodies is to have been exposed to it, or well, exposed and, you know, the immune system kicked in and produced antibodies, or for them to be vaccinated against it, which is the more likely scenario. So anthrax antibodies were found in the blood of a North Korean soldier who defected to the south. Intelligence sources told Seoul's media, increasing concerns about the country's biological weapons production. The unidentified intelligence official who spoke to the South Korea's Channel A network did not specify which soldier it was referring to. At least 4 North Korean soldiers have defected in the past 7 months. Anthrax antibodies have been found in the North Korean defector who escaped this year, the official was quoted as saying in the news report, which aired on Tuesday. In my opinion, that would be the soldier who was shot. Generally, I don't think they'd be really having access to a South Korean's blood who wasn't, you know, shot. So he was shot, and obviously his blood was spilling or whatever, and they probably, you know, did some tests in addition to finding the parasites that were inside of him. You know, they probably did some blood tests to check for any further malnutrition diseases, anything like that, and may have found anthrax antibodies. The reason I say that also is because there was one after him, but the two before him, they were a while ago. So if anything, we would have heard about this before, but we're only hearing about it now, which suggests to me it's coming from the guy who ran across the DMZ and got shot in the process. Anthrax has an incubation period of anywhere from 10 days to 6 weeks. I don't believe there is an antidote once the symptoms have taken effect. The only thing is a prevention. So if you know that you've been exposed to anthrax, you can get an injection that will prevent the anthrax from developing or activating within your body. But you have to take the medication for 60 days, as that's the incubation period for anthrax. And sorry, I said 6 weeks earlier. It was 60 days, not 6 weeks. So 10 days to 60 days. It's unusual because obviously there's been reports that they're trying to weaponize the anthrax, and I don't know if they'll be able to do it, but some reports are suggesting that they have already done it. They're able to load anthrax onto a missile warhead, and it would survive the incredible temperatures that would be reached upon re-entry of the missile vehicle. So it's just another thing to add to the ever increasing list of things to think about in terms of potential war. We understand the results, or we understand the effects of a nuclear war, but the effects of a biological war haven't been investigated as much. It's an even scarier prospect because, I mean, nuclear war is that, boom, people die and it's done. With biological weapons, it's something that you may not know that you've been affected biologically, and then you can possibly infect other people as well at the same time. So it not only creates fear, as in like a missile coming, but the fear of the unknown at the same time. People won't know if someone's infected or someone's not infected. It will create divisions in society. It will start to turn into like a World War Z. I've mentioned that before. It will start to turn like a World War Z where you've got normal, healthy people on one side and people potentially infected with whatever disease on the other side. And even though we're all human beings, at the end of the day, it's like when the plague came around, people didn't want to be near anyone with the plague. And why would you? You're trying to protect your life, you're trying to protect the life of your friends and your family. So it's a potentially unnerving development if biological weapons are used. And we're seeing their effects in Syria when they claim that Assad used them on the civilians. And I saw the videos of the people struggling to breathe and, their lungs shutting down, their bodies shutting down, and, people can't do anything about it but try and, make them as comfortable as possible. Which when you're dying, I don't think there is, pretty much any comfort, especially if your lungs are filling with fluid and there's no way to stop it and you're struggling to breathe. You see your death coming and it's really disturbing. So I just wanted to let you guys know that there's another potential scenario moving forward. All of these scenarios could come true, or just one of them could come true, or none of them could come true. But the risks involved are worth reporting about. And then we've got China apparently violating the UN sanctions by selling oil to North Korea. I have to just let you guys know that in the UN sanctions, China objected to the oil embargo, which is why they are one of the only countries that were still allowed to supply oil to North Korea, but legally. So if they're, passing oil from ship to ship under, illegal pretenses, then that is a violation of the UN sanctions. But China is allowed to give oil to North Korea set at a certain level. It's capped at the same level that they gave to North Korea last year, and that was one of the sticking points for China in the UN sanctions. Otherwise, they wouldn't have agreed. So that was the discussion that was going on between America and China before the UN voted on the sanctions, and that's what they agreed. It does seem that China is not playing ball at the end of the day. We've said it many, many times that it appears to me, anyway, at least, that China is quite happy to have North Korea developing nuclear weapons, even though they say they're not. We do know that they could have done something about it. They're right on the border. If China, Russia, and America got together, along with Japan and South Korea and any other country that wanted to get involved, like the UK, then North Korea would have been, dealt with pretty quickly. But because of Russia, because of China, and the prospects of them getting involved in this war, things have moved at a snail's pace, and it's just been diplomacy, sanctions, but then North Korea do more tests, then it's more diplomacy and sanctions, then North Korea do more tests, and it's just the sanctions testing, constant routine that I've talked about, which doesn't appear to be going anywhere. And as long as North Korea continue to develop their ballistic missiles, develop their nuclear program, there's going to be no way that war is not going to happen. At the end of the day, the only option, I've said it before and I'll say it again, the only option left, if they really want to stop North Korea from reaching this milestone, is to attack. But, you're restricted when you've got two other major world nuclear powers on the other side of the table saying, well, if you do that, then we'll have to do this. So your hands are kind of tied in that respect. And China, as usual, they're saying that there's no sanction breaking oil sales to North Korea. This is a lie. They're basically saying the UN Security Council last week unanimously imposed new sanctions on North Korea for a recent intercontinental ballistic missile test seeking to limit its access to refined petroleum products. The UN resolution seeks to ban nearly 90% of the refined petroleum exports to North Korea by capping them to 500,000 barrels per year. And the US drafted resolution also caps crude oil supplies to North Korea at 4 million barrels per year. China has consistently said it's fully enforcing all resolutions. The situation you have mentioned absolutely does not exist, Ren said. Without elaborating, it's unclear whether the Chinese military has any role in sanctions enforcement. But, Donald Trump is saying, or the US government is saying, that China is violating the UN sanctions by supplying oil to North Korea illegally, and China saying, no, that's not happening. At the end of the day, I believe it is happening, but at the same time, what are you going to do? Go to war with China? Essentially what it's all about, which kind of leads me on to the next report, which is the US general warns China is fighting a proxy war with the US. So North Korea is being funneled things by China, who are using the escalating tensions as a proxy war between the US, or with the US. North Korea is being used as a buffer by China between the West and their border. His comments to Fox News come after US satellite images claim to show Chinese tankers transferring fuel to North Korean ships 30 times in just 3 months, despite UN sanctions. China, normally, when they agree with us, they abstain from a UN vote, and now they're trying to put a good face forward on this. I think by about a year ago, they had a 28% increase in trade with North Korea, and I think they're probably feeling a little bit of a sting. The former general added that China are using North Korea as a proxy war with the United States. They're probably funneling things to North Korea they shouldn't, and they're fighting a proxy war with us from North Korea. They don't want to lose that North Korea buffer between the West and their border. And North Korea is known to employ deceptive shipping practices, including ship-to-ship transfers, a practice prohibited by the UNSC, or the United Nations Security Council. Ship-to-ship trades with North Korea are banned under the UN Security Council resolution adopted in September, and the revelations have sparked anger in South Korea, which has repeatedly urged China to cut ties with Kim's Hermit Kingdom. tensions in the region have soared this year, leading to fears Kim's provocative nuclear and missile tests could spark World War III. And Robert Kelly, who's a professor at the South Korea's Busan National University, said the claims were plausible. There's a lot of under the radar on the Chinese side, and Beijing does not police the border strictly or enforce the sanctions toughly. And this could be that. Maybe private institutions are the one who's, supplying China. But like Russia, I think everything that goes on in China eventually is known about by the top officials in the government, and they don't appear to be doing anything about it. And that's kind of their way. They don't want to have easy access to their borders if North Korea is not there. So I think they'll continue to support North Korea. And even though they said if North Korea, attack first, they won't support them, I think they will. Even if North Korea do attack first, China will still support them. Russia is playing the fence, trying to be mediator or whatever, but at the same time, they're increasing their military presence in the Atlantic Ocean and around the data cables and stuff like that. So, as I've mentioned before, I feel like the internet would be, non-existent in the event that anything like this happens. Thereby kind of making it a lot harder to share information. We can still share information, but it's kind of going back to post letters and post days, which obviously is not the ideal way to communicate these days when there's so many things going on, happening hour by hour, day by day. We need to be updated in real time. We can't be receiving, these reports weeks later, because that's not going to help us in any way, especially if something is imminent. And then we have Israel and the US signing a secret pact to tackle Iran and a nuclear missile threat. And the reason I wanted to mention this is just because it appears that while North Korea is a proxy for China, I feel like the war in Syria and the Middle East is a proxy war against Iran. They obviously don't want Iran to develop nuclear weapons. They don't want Iran to have accurate ballistic missiles that are capable of striking Israel. So it's the same pattern. You've got wanting to shut down Iran so that they don't have the opportunity to strike Israel, and wanting to shut down North Korea so they don't have the opportunity to strike the United States. But North Korea is basically an access road to China, and the war that's being fought in Syria and across the Middle East is basically an access road to Iran. And in the event that anything does happen, it's more than likely that Israel will, go ahead and launch a strike against Iran under the guise of, self-protection and trying to prevent Iran from reaching that milestone in terms of nuclear or ballistic missile capability. And the last thing I just want to say, it doesn't have a report on it, is I also want to put a warning out there for London as well, because, I talk a lot about the United States and Israel and China and Russia and North Korea, South Korea, Japan, all these other countries. I do mention the UK sometimes, but, considering we're coming to the end of the year, and I just keep having that Bush lyric play in my mind about "fool me once, can't get fooled again," that kind of thing. So when I look at these reports, when I look at those things, I try and understand what it is that I'm seeing, what it is that I'm reading, and I'm not hearing anything about London, not hearing anything really about the UK, even in the North Korean situation. The US and the UK have quite a special relationship, and you'd expect that the UK would be right there alongside the US, supporting it every step of the way. And though we have, said some things, and there's going to be some of our naval military, heading over to North Korea at the beginning of next year, they haven't really stepped in that way, and I feel like everything's being directed towards the United States. So I just want to put a warning out there for the UK, particularly London. Locations that I want to mention, places like the Big Ben, we've seen that destroyed many times in different medias across the spectrum. And also I wanted to alert about the Olympic Stadium in Stratford, which was used for the Olympics in 2012. I watched the opening ceremony and the closing ceremony. Immediately after I watched the opening ceremony, I was so freaked out by it that I had to call one of my friends and just ask them if they watched it. And they was like, yeah, they just watched it. It was creepy. And creepy being a nice word to use, it was satanic, is what I really think it was. It looked and felt like a ritual. And I think every person I've spoken to who saw that felt some kind of unease inside of themselves. They felt uneasy. They didn't like what they were seeing, and I didn't like what I was seeing. And I just don't know. That was 5 years ago, so I just don't know if that has anything to do with the events that are currently taking place and that could potentially take place in the next coming days. But I just wanted to put that warning out there because there's a lot going on, and our attention is being drawn into one place, and I don't want to get tunnel vision. I just want to keep my eyes open and look at everything, and not just one particular channel. So that's why I'm just putting the one out there for the UK. At the same time, New York is unquestionably a place where there appears to be some form of plan of attack for the United States. I also wanted to mention Golden Gate Bridge. It's just been on my mind a lot recently, and I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't know why some of these things pop into my head sometimes. They just do, and I just remain true and just say what I'm thinking. Whether it pans out, whether it doesn't, is to be seen. But I feel like I should just mention it at least. I may do some research into it and stuff like that, but the Golden Gate Bridge, it appears to have some significance for some reason in my mind, but I haven't pinned it down yet. When I do, you guys will be the first to know. So that's pretty much the end of my report. Just wanted to bring your attention to the different reports that are out there, the potential that they're now talking about for submarine attacks, where they haven't really talked about that in the mainstream media. And then obviously the whole preparing another missile launch in the next coming days or weeks, just as we're reaching the end of the year. The last possible days where something can happen in 2017, and then it's over. So with all these things coming up, and the military now going quiet on what they're going to be doing, and with anthrax being found in North Korean defectors, Trump fully going against China in terms of labeling them as not following the sanctions that have been imposed, and China objecting to that, and obviously the whole war with North Korea really being about China and its push to become the global dominance, to take over from the US and become the main country for global dominance, which, if the Illuminati card game and the Economist magazine and all the other different signals that we've been shown, it points to China eventually becoming the main country dominant in the financial system, as well as dominant military wise. And basically I just think that whole Chinese system, the way that they've got it, would be a perfect system to move on to the one world government and the antichrist system, especially since China is a communist nation. If they were to assume dominance of, the global market and everything else, then it would be much easier to move on from that to the antichrist system than it would be to move on from where we currently are to that system. So it would be like a smoothish transitional period for them to go from the dollar to the pound to the yen, and then to the last currency, which is Bitcoin or something similar to Bitcoin. A cryptocurrency is most likely what it would be. So that would mean you wouldn't be able to buy or sell without having access to that Bitcoin system. And the most likely way of doing that is going to be on some kind of device or some kind of chip, which could be implanted in you. They already have RFID chips, so they're well ahead of the game, ready to put all these things in action. Every single thing has been set up nicely so that they're ready to just go ahead and get it all done. So that's it. You guys have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and God bless.